Good morning, everybody. This is the first show in this season of the Campaign with Ernie Powell. The Campaign with Ernie Powell is essentially a public policy talk with key players in the public policy realm. Our guest today is Congressperson Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff is the congressional representative for the 28th Congressional District. That encompasses the areas of West Hollywood, Echo Park, Glendale, the eastern border of Pasadena, and such great and wonderful landmarks are in that district, such as the Hollywood Bowl, the Hollywood Sign, the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He was first elected to that seat in 2000. That's when he and I met during a congressional forum that ARP hosted that year. Before that, he was a member of the State Senate in California and also worked as Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Los Angeles District in Southern California. He is the top Democrat on the House Permanent Select Committee of Intelligence, and he also is the co-founding member of a caucus called the Congressional Caucus for Freedom of the Press, which is important to all of us in this very difficult time. The Atlantic Monthly said he is the congressman who infuriates the president. So that's one sort of footnote in thinking about what we're going to be talking about today. I work with Social Security Works. I'm their West Coast coordinator. I've been there for about 4 years. It's a very aggressive organization that works to fight and expand Social Security and Medicare. I've been there for about 4 years now, and previously I was policy director in Southern California for ARP. And I will say that in all the work I've done, one of the congressional members that we trust the most and rely on the most to protect our effort on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid is Congressman Schiff, our guest today. So, with that introduction, Congressman, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you again.
Absolutely. So let's lead off with this first question. You're a frequent guest on news shows and answering questions about the conduct and policy of the Trump administration. As we talk today, we'll go into some specifics of that. But right now, as we begin, can you please answer this sort of fundamental question? Please share your view of the state of our democracy. How worried and or optimistic are you at this moment in history?
Well, I think our democracy is in considerable risk, and I have not felt this way before. I was elected in 2000. I served in Congress for 8 years during the George W. Bush administration, and even though I had serious policy differences with him, I always felt that he was a fundamentally decent person that had the country's interests at heart as he understood them, that he respected our institutions, that he respected the press. I don't feel that's the case with this president. And so much of what he's doing is an assault on the rule of law, on our institutions, on our Justice Department, our FBI, our free press, the denigration of judges that rule against them based on their heritage. All of these things, I think, put us at risk. The fact that he could talk about potentially firing an investigator who's looking into issues that may implicate him or members of his family, it would be unthinkable for any other president. And it's a time when I think all of us need to stand up for the rule of law and our institutions. And I think everyone has a role to play in public office and in private life and civic life and in corporate life because I do feel so much of what we treasure about our democracy is at risk.
Well, thank you. I want to say thank you for that answer, but also it is quite worrisome. But I do very much agree with your analysis. You know, one of the things that I've focused on personally in my career, and again, this has given us opportunity to work with your office and the two organizations that I've worked in a lot, is Social Security and Medicare. As again, I'm the West Coast person for Social Security Works. Our organization has worked closely with you and your office on many good policy issues regarding Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. It's been a tough period due to attacks from both the Trump administration as well as Republican assaults on our retirement security system. The tax cut put in place did real damage to Medicare and Medicaid. We thank you for your vote against it. We know that Speaker Ryan, or former Speaker Ryan, took aim at Social Security, which is really kind of weird because as I read his family history, that his family survived on the survivor benefit after his father died. So please tell us where we stand on those programs right now, both the good news and the bad news regarding the future of Social Security and our retirement security programs?
Well, the good news is that Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid enjoy very strong and bipartisan support throughout the country. People recognize that these programs have been an essential safety net for millions of American families. It's meant that seniors could retire with dignity and not in poverty. There's so many American families, I think up to half of the country, where in their retirement their sole source of income is Social Security. So people recognize its fundamental value. It was an issue recently in the Conor Lamb election in Western Pennsylvania. He, I think, campaigned strongly on protecting Social Security and Medicare, and those issues resonated with voters. So that's the good news. Out in the country, these programs continue to enjoy overwhelming support. The bad news is we just passed a tax cut that cost the country close to $2 trillion over time. That's $2 trillion we didn't have. And the tax cut basically benefited large companies and very wealthy families. And we're borrowing that money, and no sooner was the ink dry on that tax cut then the Republicans said we need to make cuts to Medicare in the amount of about $2 trillion. So they just cut $2 trillion in taxes, and they say there's a $2 trillion shortfall now that we need to take out of the hide of Medicare. I would have thought they would be a little less blatant about it, but no. They took up just last week what they called a balanced budget amendment, which also would have required cuts to Social Security, in significant part because of the tax cut they just passed. So they've made their priorities quite clear, and that is, tax cuts for wealthy people and for corporations are priority number one. And if that means we need to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and go after seniors and people with disabilities, then we're prepared to do that. If it means that people with an estate worth between 10 and 20 million can get a huge tax cut, then we're willing to do it. Now, that is not the priorities of the country, and it's why this tax cut, probably unlike any other historically, has been deeply unpopular. But it does put at risk these vital programs for everyday American families.
Do you think the BBA, the Balanced Budget Amendment, is going to come back this session?
I don't think so. I think they knew that it wouldn't have the votes, but they were getting a lot of heat from some of their supporters. You were supposed to be the fiscally responsible people. You ran on being fiscally responsible, and now you put the country in a far worse fiscal footing with a Republican president and a Republican Congress than it was before. Under Democrats and with Bill Clinton, we were on a path to having no debt and deficit. Now we are on a path to having the greatest debt as a percentage of our GDP since World War II, and may very well go beyond that in terms of deficits versus GDP. So they wanted to do something, I think, as a face-saving measure, so they could say, well, I voted for a balanced budget. Okay, yes, you voted for a gimmicky balanced budget amendment, but you also voted for a tax cut that you weren't willing to pay for, that benefited predominantly very wealthy people. And, for Paul Ryan, who I think people had put a lot of hope and confidence in as a fundamentally decent person who was a policy wonk and a acolyte of Jack Kemp, who believed in fiscal responsibility, I have to say it's a complete betrayal of what he said he was for. This wasn't a reform at all. It made the tax code, if anything, more complicated. It was simply a cut for very wealthy people that was fiscally irresponsible, and that's unfortunately the legacy he's going to have to live with.
My notes reflect, to follow up on what you just said, and thank you for those comments, my notes reflect that 83% of the cuts go to the top 1% from the tax law, which, by the way, we call at Social Security Works the tax scam. So it's I'm sorry. Go
I think you're right. I think those numbers are exactly right. And, for those of us in California and many other blue states, basically you can look at everyone you see and say, okay, at least one out of every three of you is getting a tax increase. because they decided, in addition to cutting taxes for very wealthy people, that they were going to punish the blue states by doing away with the deduction for state and local taxes. So in California, it'll be more than 1 out of every 3 will get a tax hike, let alone a cut. But if you're a teacher and your taxes are going up, or you're a family that has large medical bills and your taxes are going up, I hope you'll take solace in knowing that people who have large estates worth tens of millions of dollars are going to get a tax cut. So there's that consolation. But frankly, that is not much of a consolation.
So we've got the midterms coming, and there's a lot. I think in California, in our state, we have at least 7 congressional districts that are competitive. There's a couple of vacancies that took place. What will be your level of engagement in of course, every 2 years we all know that House members run again, but beyond your own seat, what will be your level of engagement as the Democrats seek to take back the House and maybe even the Senate?
I'm really devoting all of my non-working time to helping the campaign to take the House back. Of course, my own campaign for re-election in my district, but also I've been in, I think, 5 states in the last week, helping to campaign for challengers, Democratic challengers, vulnerable incumbents, because this midterm, more than any other in my lifetime, will provide the only meaningful check on an executive that has put the country at risk. Everything we're trying to do in Congress to fend off really bad things from happening, and we've had some successes in saving the Affordable Care Act and access to health care for tens of millions of people. But everything we've tried to do, frankly, is de minimis compared to what we can do to protect the country if we're able to restore some set of checks and balances by having at least one of the houses in Democratic hands. So I'm going to be deeply involved in all of the California races, but more than that, I've been traveling around the country, was in New Mexico and Nebraska and New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and I'll be going wherever I can be helpful to take back the House, because this is the opportunity for everyone to get involved in making sure that our democracy thrives, and making sure that we have a rule of law that we respect in this country. And it begins with a check on the executive, and that check has to come from a Democratic House.
As we mentioned earlier, I'm with Social Security Works, and we, as an organization, we are committing a lot of time to going into key districts and swing districts to educate folks on the dangers apparent in this administration and with the Republican Congress on Social Security and Medicare as well as Medicaid. What's your advice for a citizen in terms of how they would be involved in the coming months on these kinds of issues?
First of all, I want to thank you for your work and for the work of your organization, which has been tremendously important now for years.
Thank you, sir.
There are enormous opportunities for people to get involved, and one of the things that gives me great hope for our future is so many Americans, so many millions who have never been involved before are getting involved now and participating in marches and rallies and town halls, and
it's exciting.
Are phoning their representatives and emailing them. It's really extraordinary. I was sitting next to a woman on the plane flying back to D.C. about a month ago, and she introduced herself, and she said, I'm part of an organization of 11,000 women online. We call ourselves Law Mamas. We are lawyers, we are mothers, we are organized, we are determined, and we're taking matters into our own hands. And I think it's fantastic, and there are just so many people getting involved. And what I encourage people to do is decide, what are they going to do in the next 8 months to make a difference about something they really care about. Don't try to do it all. When you look at everything going wrong in the country right now, it's tempting to just say, okay, it's too much. I'm just going to throw up my hands, turn off the TV, sit in a chair and hibernate because it's just too much. We can't afford for people to do that. So don't try to do it all. Try to decide, okay, I'm going to make a difference on Social Security, or I'm going to make a difference on the